You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. There were a few things at Neo4j that got upgrades over the last week that I've run into issues with or been exploring. Plus, I have news on the Graph Academy Neo4j with Java courses. I'll share all the latest goodies there. Then I read an article from Weaviate talking about naive RAG versus GraphRAG and combining a vector database, graph database, and the Microsoft GraphRAG methodology. Let's get going. The first topic I want to cover today is that Aura Free, our free tier for Neo4j cloud database, got an upgrade over the last week or so. And most of this would have been very seamless to the end user. It was pretty much for me too, although I did have one little bug where I started spinning up an instance about the time they were in the upgrade, which caused a couple little issues there, but that got resolved pretty quickly. But I've noticed that they've upgraded some things in the Aura console as well. I wanted to kind of chat through a little bit of that. The first one is that if you use Data Importer through our Aura console, you now have a couple of options for importing the schema. The first one is to do it manually, which is what you've always done if you've done this before, where you map the tables and columns or files or schemas coming from other systems, and you map those to a graph schema, if you will. The second option is actually to have the schema generated from the CSV files or flat files you're importing, which did a somewhat decent job. There were several things I wanted to tweak, like labels on nodes and things that didn't look overly nice, I would say. They copied the CSV file names as the node labels and stuff, which wasn't the greatest experience there, but it didn't do too badly. And then the third option is an AI-generated schema, which from my perspective did the absolute best, actually, and was really, really fast. I really loved this. There's a disclaimer there that says make sure you check the schema that gets generated. Of course, you always want to do that for anything AI generated, but I really thought this did an excellent job. There were a few tweaks that I had to make. There were, I think, a couple of missing relationship properties. I wanted to fill in some of the relationship types with better names and such that were more descriptive, but overall, it got the structure and it named the nodes correctly and all of that. It looked really nice. This is definitely an improvement over just a manual input because you spend a lot of time in the manual rendition just mapping point click map column from this table or this file to this one in the graph and so on. It's just a little bit messier and more time consuming. The AI generated one definitely cut down on the time and effort you had to spend there, but you can't just use it out of the box either. Just be aware there will be probably a couple of tweaks you have to make, but it is much better than doing it all manually. So I was really excited to see that. The second thing is that our LLM Knowledge Graph Builder tool got some updates as well. There were a few bugs that got introduced when the Aura database updated on the back end. It broke just a couple of things in the Knowledge Graph Builder. I opened a couple of GitHub issues, and those are pretty much resolved now. It was a really fast turnaround from the team. They had fixes within a day or two that I could test and some back and forth on the discussions on GitHub. Response was excellent and super fast. I'd get up in the morning and there'd be a new comment or new update to something and I would test some things. And then by the next morning, they'd have everything again ready to go, a fix ready and try this. And does this look right? It's just really good experience so far. The dev version for the LLM Graph Builder has those fixes in place. Everything is looking good there, but the push to production has not occurred just yet, but that should be pretty soon, I think. I had a couple of different issues that again had some like sub issues going on there, and within a week, less than a week, stuff is fixed and hopefully we'll be moving into the production rendition. So excellent response there. I'm super excited about using some of the new capabilities that are there too. The LLM Graph Builder has some new things that are available as far as like the schema mapping graph enhancement section of the Knowledge Graph Builder. So if you haven't checked those out, definitely take a peek there. The next topic I want to talk about is that there is a new Java object mapping preview feature in the Neo4j Java driver. Now, this was something that was interesting because I may have mentioned it on the podcast before, but the Neo4j Java driver did not used to map the results coming back from Neo4j to your Java domain classes, which kind of seemed odd to me when I first came across this missing feature, I guess, if you want to call it. that when you're dealing with Java, typically you almost always map to your domain classes, right? The Java driver did not let you do that previously. And now they have a preview feature that will map Neo4j results coming back instead of generic data types coming back. You now can map all of that data into your Java objects that might be your domain classes in your application. This is super exciting to have. It is a preview feature, which means it will be going general availability, GA, but the update iterations for preview features are much faster right now, so they can iterate and move things along and fix things much faster than the standard release cycles. They outline a little bit of what preview features entail in the Java driver GitHub repository. If you're interested, what all that means, feel free to check that out. But I am working on a sample application to showcase this functionality, but I did get pulled into some other things this week, so I got a little sidetracked. I will come back to that, and I will hopefully have an update and some GitHub repository code, maybe some content around that, showcasing this new feature. Now, if you do need a more full-featured object graph mapping type of functionality, the GitHub discussion that this object mapping feature is under does mention that you probably should use something more full-fledged. For instance, in the Spring ecosystem, you can use the Neo4j OGM library, the Object Graph Mapper library. That provides a lot more capability and full features, but this does give you a really good start if you're just using the Neo4j Java driver and you just need some basic object mapping with Java. Then the next thing I came across is a colleague at Neo4j sent me the MCP Java SDK GitHub repository link. This is really cool because MCP has now released a Java SDK. So you don't have to just work with Python or JavaScript, which is kind of the typical AI applications right now. You now have a Java interface too. This enables Java applications to interact with AI models and tools through a standardized interface. They're also, as part of the MCP Java SDK, it includes a Spring AI MCP, which will add Spring Boot integration for your starter projects. You can use this in Spring Initializer to add these starters. I actually tested this out. I went out to Spring Initializer, typed in MCP, and they popped up the Spring AI integrations with MCP. This is super exciting. Again, the Java SDK includes things past Spring as well, but just some options for you. If you're a non-Spring developer or a Spring developer, you have options to utilize this new MCP Java SDK. So I'll include the GitHub repository link in the notes. Finally, the last bit that I got to this week was Graph Academy and Neo4j courses. The new Using Neo4j with Java course is now live. I talked a little bit about this course in earlier episodes, but it's a starter course. It's a free online self-paced course that you can take. It introduces the Neo4j Java driver basics in a frameworkless application format. This is hopefully a better on-ramp for starting to use Neo4j with Java, so feel free to take that course and see what you think and provide feedback on that. Then we also do have a full application course for working with Neo4j and Java. That does need quite a bit of a revamp though, which is actually what I've been working on most of the week. I plan to go in and simplify the application, integrate some of the feedback that we've received over the last couple of years that it's been live, and upgrade a lot of the library versions because it has not been upgraded in a while, and some of those library versions, the dependencies are a little bit outdated to say the least. So I'm going back and fixing that, and hopefully we'll have some updates there, but it's quite a bit of a spaghetti ball to disentangle everything, pull things apart, plus update the course content too. The piece of content that I want to highlight for this week, I came across a really great article from Weaviate, which is a vector database company, by the way, called Exploring RAG and GraphRAG, Understanding When and How to Use Both. It talks a little bit about RAG in general, kind of similar to how I talk about retrieval augmented generation, what it is, how it works, and so on. And then they go into detail on some naive RAG versus GraphRAG. Talks first a little about what is naive RAG, which it's a vector-only RAG or vector similarity search RAG, if you will. The full article also includes a recipe that you can run with Colab, which I thought was really cool. And then they go into the GraphRAG piece. This is from Microsoft's solution perspective, though. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft GraphRAG and their approach, it covers the architecture and construct a demo that uses Weaviate for the vector search piece, Neo4j for the knowledge graph piece, and the Microsoft GraphRAG for the methodology piece. And it has a connected GitHub project that's linked in the blog post, which I think is really cool. They go over the financial contracts data set that they're using to back the application. And the post goes into some details on different approaches you can do for GraphRAG. The one that I am most familiar with is that local search option. There's 2 others that are in there as well. But typically when you go with the standard RAG, I would say, you do a vector similarity search, and then you tack on a retrieval query that pulls related entities. That is going to be that local search approach that they talk about. That's what Spring AI uses, I believe LangChain4j, and a lot of the other providers as well. Then the article wraps up with some limitations of GraphRAG, things like reindexing data and hypernodes or supernodes that skew results. These are kind of common graph problems, and then summarize overall highlights of the article and topics they've covered. This was another busy week finding bugs and testing product updates in Neo4j, and then diving into the Graph Academy Java application course to make some major revisions. Finally, I read an excellent article from Weaviate discussing when and how to use naive or vector RAG versus GraphRAG. Talk to you again next week. Thanks for listening and happy coding.